Good morning, Westside. It is lovely to see you this fine day. Thanks so much for being here. Thank you for making this place a part of your Sundays, and more importantly, a part of your lives. Your presence is a testament that what we are doing together here is important, that it is worthwhile, that what we are doing here, what we are about, is even potentially life-changing. So thank you for making this place special by your presence. Well, there are many places, I think, that at some point during the weekend gather to talk about what they believe. Various religions and various variants of those religions come together, and they often communally say what they believe. Many times this is said in the form of a creed or statement of belief. The word creed is derived from the Latin word credo, which means I believe. In Islam, for instance, a form of creed is often used called the Shahada. It's one of the 5 pillars of Islam, and it states, there is no God but Allah. Muhammad is Allah's messenger. In Judaism, some say the Shema Israel is a form of creed. It says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one." But Christianity really has the market on creed's corner. There's the Nicene Creed, the Apostles' Creed, the Chalcedonian Creed, the Athanasian Creed, and still others. These creeds, these statements of faith, were intended to have the people publicly proclaim in one voice they all believe the same thing. Now, we say that Unitarian Universalism is a creedless faith, that there is no statement to which we must all adhere to or believe in order to join the group, in order to become a member. And yet, every week, most of us, in one voice, recite an affirmation. I say most of us because a good Unitarian Universalist will find ways to argue over just about anything. So some of us may not go along and recite our affirmation on principle alone. But there truly is a difference between our affirmation and a creed. Our affirmation was voted on as our individual church came into being. And if the membership finds it necessary, by our democratic process, our affirmation can be changed. It is not necessarily printed in stone. Now, it's a pretty good affirmation. And as you visit other UU churches, you may very well find similar or only slightly different affirmations from what we use here at Westside. We did not really create the words. These words are found in our hymnal, slightly adapted for what was viewed to be the needs of this particular community. But I've heard some argue that the affirmation and the 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism is a sort of creeping creedalism. And to be honest, I would tend to agree with these critics. But there's a couple of things that keep me from being bothered by this too terribly much. First, I personally like the words. These words, to a great extent, ring true to me, so I have little difficulty reciting them. And second, I do believe that if we as a community deemed it appropriate, we could change the words of our affirmation. I continue to believe there to be no test, no set of words with which I must completely agree, no bar over which I or anyone else must traverse in order to be a Unitarian Universalist in good stead. So every week, together, we recite our affirmation printed in your order of service. And we say out loud at the very beginning what the doctrine of this church is, don't we? Say that line again with me, if you will. Love is the doctrine of this church. Yes, love. Love is the doctrine of this church. And that, in and of itself, is quite extraordinary to my way of thinking. All of the things we do, all of the things we offer, everything else at Westside is based not upon some deity, not upon some holy book or some other idol, not upon some promise of an afterlife as a reward. What we do here is based on love. That, my friends, is incredibly simple, and yet we know it is incredibly difficult. But it is. We have decided as a religious community, it is what we are called to do. In my personal religious studies, I've come across a variety of ways to look at love. I think society at large, for the most part, tends to see love as romantic. And while this is thankfully changing to a degree, I think society tends to see romantic love as default heterosexual. And society tends to recognize, I think, the difficulty that comes from sustaining romantic love over the long term. Now, love can be funny. I heard about this fellow who, to prove his love for his spouse, swam the deepest river, crossed the widest desert, and climbed the highest mountain. And she divorced him because he was never home. And love can be tricky. This fellow called home to his spouse and says, "Honey, I've been asked to go fishing in a big lake up in Canada with my boss and several of his friends, and we will all be gone for a week. This is a good opportunity for me to get that promotion I've been wanting. So if you would, please pack me enough clothes for a week and set out my rod and tackle box. We're leaving from the office, so I'll swing by the house to pick my things up. And oh, if you would, please pack my new blue silk pajamas." The wife thinks about this and thinks it sounds kind of odd, but she does it anyway. And the following weekend he comes home a little tired, but otherwise looking good, and the wife welcomes him home. "Master, have you caught any fish?" He said, "Yes, lots of walleye, some bluegill, and a few pike." And he then asked, "Why didn't you pack my blue silk pajamas like I asked, darling?" And she replied, "I did. They were in your tackle box." So love, as good as it is, can be difficult. It can be tricky. Now, many of you know that I rarely, but whether rightly or wrongly, turn to the Bible for inspiration, much less the Apostle Paul. There are many, many places to find inspiration in literature. There's lots of good stories in the world. And there are a lot of places around Fort Worth where folks can go to get biblical inspiration from a preacher. It's not really that I don't like the Bible. It's not like that at all. It's honestly just not my habit, my reflex to reach to the Bible for inspiration. But I do admire the 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians. We recited together in our responsive reading. Oh, and just to let you know, those who allow the Bible or Paul to create a little anxiety or anger within you, I'll be referring to them both again next week, and quite possibly the week after that. So you have been warned. But Paul tells us in this letter to the church in Corinth, which I'm sure you all know is just north of here, near Denby, that you can have many things in life, many gifts, many abilities, but if you have not love, the others will eventually come to an end. They'll disappear. But if there is love in your life, then almost anything is possible. This reading, this passage is quite famous. It's one of the better known pieces of the early Christian writings in the Bible. It is perhaps overused in weddings. And this is because, I believe, we do tend to think of love in that romantic sort of way. But it could very well be that Paul was thinking of love in a different way. The Greeks had at least 4 ways of viewing love. Probably least known of the types of love the Greeks spoke of was called storge. It is the least used in ancient manuscripts. And when it is used, it is sometimes viewed to be the kind of love where, though there is affection, one sort of puts up with the other. This kind of love might be seen in families, particularly among siblings, where there is love, but it is a love that is almost fulfilled out of a sense of duty more than anything else. An example might be that I love my sister because that's what a brother is expected to do. Now, philia love is a bit better well known. This is a love often thought to be born out of friendship. Or it may be out of mutual admiration that 2 people love one another in this way. Plato reminded us, or suggested, that there need not be sexual attraction in this kind of love, and thus we are reminded of platonic relationships. Love of the philia nature among brothers in the Greek is known as adelphos, which gets us a city called Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. Then there is the love called eros. It's not the kind of love one has with their brother. It is the erotic kind of love, the physical love between lovers, the sexy, sort of makes you quiver kind of love. The love that, alas, most typically is relatively short-lived, but is intoxicating nonetheless. As such, we know those who go from partner to partner, attempting to have never-ending eros, or who just believe there is this one soulmate out there with whom eros can be everlasting. I wish them luck in their endeavors. However, if lovers are fortunate, the love of eros will morph into a sort of philia love composed of mutual understanding and admiration. Those less lucky go into the storge kind of love born out of duty. And then there is the love the Apostle Paul used in his letter to the Corinthians, the agape kind of love. This has been described as a sacrificial kind of love, the kind of love that in some ways transcends the other kinds of love. It's unconditional, and it's rare. Most of us only dream of this kind of love. Now, I'm a skeptic by nature, and I'm somewhat skeptical of this kind of love. I'm convinced we see this kind of unconditional love more often in dogs than in human animals. Though I should say, I think it incumbent upon me to say, I feel like I experience this kind of love with my partner, Gail. I will also say I try as best I can not to test her unconditional love too often. But early Christians, say the scholars I read, turned this agape love around in order to say that instead of unconditional love between 2 human beings, agape love was the unconditional love that God offered through the sacrifice of His Son. So love can be tricky. Love can be rough and unkind and seemingly merciless. But love can also be understanding. It can be forgiving. It can be beautiful. And that is the kind of love we attempt to create here at Westside. For me, when I learned about Unitarian Universalism long ago, it was almost sort of exotic, almost like that eros kind of love. When I read the principles, when I saw the sources of different kinds of faith traditions, when I found a religious community where I could authentically, unapologetically belong, it all seemed sort of dreamy, almost perfect. Then, like all relationships, the arrows wore off, and there was a philia kind of love, a respect for Unitarian Universalism, wherein I realized the ideals of the faith must be put into action by human beings. And we human beings, as hard as we try, we make mistakes. We can be disagreeable and we can be honoring. Sometimes we get in the way of something that is beautiful and we mess it up. But in my humble estimation, we do a pretty good job of loving here at Westside. Not perfectly, of course, but we do it well. We do it consistently. When we're at our best, we live out the idea offered long ago that we need not think alike to love alike. So we understand that it's easy to love when people do what we believe they should do. It's easy to love when the other agrees with my ideas. It's easy to love when another loves me back. It's much more difficult to love when we disagree with a sermon on a particular Sunday. It's much more difficult to love when the church board makes a decision with which we disagree. It's much more difficult to love when the minister of your church disappoints you. To love that way, an agape kind of unconditional love, to love that way, to live that way, is too much to ask, isn't it? But that is exactly what Unitarian Universalism asks you to try to do. To love this place, a place which represents an ideal in a way that's very difficult to do. To love this place, to love the people here when it is easy, but more importantly, to love this place and these people when it is hard, when it is difficult. To do less, I think, would not be living up to what we say here every single week. To be a Unitarian Universalist may look easy at first blush. Many say to be a UU allows you to believe whatever you want. But what we say here is that what we do, what we offer, is surrounded within the context of love, real love, in the good times and the times when it's tough. So if you would, say it with me again. Say the first line of our affirmation.
Love is the doctrine of the church.
So let us now go forth, both outside these walls, but also within them, and do our best to practice what we preach. As we rise in body or spirit, we join together in singing our closing hymn, number 238. We'll sing both verses, all